Do I need to be by this mic here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pick it up and carry it with you.
Oh, I can?
Yes, sir, you can.
Fabulous.
And
Good.
if that screen gets in your way, I can shut it off.
Well, I won't be looking at the screen. Yeah.
Your light's flashing up there, Jack.
You're blinking up there.
You have a strobe light.
I'm in a disco. Yeah, we gotta get that fixed.
I can turn that tank off for now if you want. Yeah, you can go ahead.
I don't need it, I got a piano back there.
Okay.
So I think this is a first for me to speak at a spiritual center that my talk is preceded by Steppenwolf. So, or a cover therein. So I bring you greetings from the Hilltop Spiritual Center in Fallbrook, California, where I am the spiritual director. I've been there since 2005, and I see some people here that I've known for many years. I won't disclose how many because that would make us old. But anyway, it's a joy for me to be here. Thank you so much. So my talk today is The Wisdom of the Wild. And I'd like to begin by referencing probably the book that inspired me to this talk. And that is Maurice Sendak Into the Wild. Y'all remember that book? It's a children's book. It's a lovely book. And it starts when Max put on his wolf suit and got into mischief of one form or another. And then apparently his mother is having a difficult time with Max being the way he is, and so he is sent into his room. But that is where the adventure begins. In his imagination, he travels the sea. He goes into the jungle. He meets great dragons and monsters, and he becomes quite the heroic person. And then when it is time for him to come back, he does. And as the story ends, his supper is still hot. But it speaks to, I think, one of the most important qualities of being a human. It is the thing, I think, that makes us, or reflects our divinity at its highest point. And that is the power of the imagination. And that's what I'd like to speak at today. And really, if we think about it, the most profound thing we can do is imagine. And what I find probably the thing that I enjoy working with most with other people and in our spiritual community is really the reintegration, the rehabilitation of the imagination. Robert Stardillo, in his book, Freeing the Soul from Fear, says something very interesting. He says that when we are traumatized, when we are afraid, when we are anxious, our imagination flatlines. It's as if we go into survival mode. And when we are in survival mode, we're not really capable of novelty. What we do is simply reference what we already know. And so, nothing grows without innovation or novelty. If I was to say that there is a word for me that defines this divine presence, it would be novelty. And so our real work then, as spiritual communities, as Jesus says, the leaven in the dough, that corrupting force for good, is really to work at re-engaging the imagination. Because when that happens, anything and everything is possible. And I've been thinking about this quote from the Enlightenment philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, and he says this. He says that only the other can surprise us. Only the other. And surprise is one of those important parts of our existence. Rabbi Abraham Heschel says that We should be surprised every day. We should have the capacity to feel amazement and wonder and awe. And if we are not, we should pay attention to that. So only the other can surprise us. So what does that mean? The other. The other is that which we don't control, we may not be able to define. The other is synonymous, I believe, with the wild, the wilderness. To go to that place that is uncharted and unknown. To go with Max into the imagination, into the wild place. Because if we don't, if we continue to insulate ourselves, which our culture, I would offer, encourages, coerces, bamboozles us into doing, we cut ourselves off. Aaron Simmons, who wrote a wonderful book called Camping with Kierkegaard, says this. He says, when we stay enmeshed in the familiar, we do not open ourselves to the disruption of the unexpected. The disruption of the unexpected. What I want to offer is this for your consideration. It is that word disruption, which is the root of healing. Because the disruption breaks the pattern of familiarity, sometimes the energetic pattern within our own body. Disruption is the thing that brings about radical shift or change. Disruption is that which moves us from the familiar into the unfamiliar. What would be the point of faith? You know, the spiritual path, as I begin to understand it more and more, is sort of a threefold way, is it not? It is order, disorder, reorder. And most of us want to take the bus from order to reorder. We hate the disorder. Oh, let me just speak for myself. But that's where the juice is, right? Because the order is what's known and what's familiar and what's predictable and what insulates us. The order is the echo chamber. It's the place of where everything is familiar. But when we read the myths and legends of the Hebrew Bible or the teachings of Jesus or any other spiritual literature that we may watch, the Bhagavad Gita, the Dhammapada, the Quran, in my case, Lord of the Rings, it's disorder that breaks the pattern, that creates the avenue for novelty, for shift, for change, where a new imagination can begin to move things and break things into things. Because, you know, the thing of it is it's so easy in the world that we live in to just live with shared assumptions. And we're afraid kind of the unfamiliar or the unexpected. We may even find that we kind of retreat to this echo chamber, and here's the example. So all of us went through a remarkable disruption, literally of the whole planet, a couple years ago during the pandemic. And what was it that people said over and over and over again? I just want things to return to normal. like that'll ever happen. But think about what that means. I just want things to return to how I can predict, maybe control. I just want things to be in a certain way. And sometimes we do that with God. We want God to be normal on our terms. But again, if we read the myths and legends of Scripture, I think sometimes God thinks more of us than we do ourselves. There's that beautiful passage of Jacob wrestling through the night with the divine, demanding a blessing with this interesting character that it's hard to say or who this is. Is it an angel? Is it God himself? Who is the person? But it is that disorder, that disruption, which creates the space for blessing. Even when we think in terms of the great teacher Jesus of Nazareth, he periodically goes into the wilds. Because there, I would assume, there's a disruption that happens. There's a break with the pattern of the world in which he has come to teach and to offer a new way of living. His challenge is, we are in the Easter season. And I think the Easter season, when we think about that and when we think about the teachings of who Jesus was and what he has to offer, it kind of comes down to this. What world do you choose to live in? The world of order, the world of Caesar, the world of empire, the world that says peace through strength and power, or the world of distributive justice? Is it strength through power, or peace through power, or peace through justice? And even within our own self, is it finding peace by finding a position in this world that we can navigate and call our own? Or is it peace by allowing ourselves to become that agents of change and to live that experience of justice? There was a great movie out several years ago. It was a movie called Into the Wild, and it had to do with, it was actually based on a true story. It was about a young man from college, who graduated from college, and he decided that he didn't want anything to do with this world and the system that it was, and he was going to move into the wild of Alaska. And he does. And he promptly dies. Because he wasn't prepared. He moved to Alaska. He found an abandoned bus. He wasn't prepared for the winter, and he died, it is believed, by ingesting poisonous mushrooms because he starved. And so the thought about that, I think, is this, is we may be called to the wild, but that doesn't mean we go unprepared. It doesn't mean, the wild doesn't mean abandoning the principles by how we operate. Justice, goodness, truth, beauty. Nor does it mean domesticating the wild. But it is developing that quality of navigation in through the wilderness, the wild. And what I want to offer to you today to consider is that tool is the imagination. It's a powerful thing. I was reading an article the other day that reminded me of a movie that I saw, years and years and years ago. And there was a quote by Robert McNamara. Anybody know who Robert McNamara is? Memory? Nobody at Sunday service. But he said something that has sat with me. He said, the reason that the Vietnam War happened, he was Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War under Kennedy. The reason the Vietnam War happened is because of a failure of imagination. Yeah. That war is a failure of imagination. Now, something that my teacher used to say, which I think is very interesting, is she says, War happens because we don't know how to do conflict. We don't know how to engage because we don't know what to do with the other, the unfamiliar, the thing that draws us out of our own echo chamber. And so we try to practice like Rome, right? Peace through strength, peace through power. I'll muscle my way through here. Except, if we think about it, that way of operating in the world has worked never. And isn't that the message of Jesus? Maybe there's another way of doing this thing. And that other way of doing things is to cultivate something that is possible. Again, if we go back to Abraham Heschel, that we should be amazed, surprised, filled with awe, which leads us to reverence. And what would it be like? What would it be like for us to imagine a world in which we see every person and everything as a reflection of the divine? How would we organize a national economy if we saw every person as a precious manifestation of divinity? How would we deal with the natural resources in our great country if we saw that everything was created by the divine for our delight and good? How would we walk in this world? How would we relate to each other? How would we embrace this incredible experience of the divine if we knew that we were part of and one of it? And I think there's another part of this as well that I would just offer for our consideration today. And it's this. It's the difference between the imagination and fantasy. Now, fantasy often begins or incorporates one of the three great lies. The three great lies are shame, blame, and regret. Or another way of saying that is, the first lie is, my life would be different if I was different. That's shame. That's acknowledging that I'm broken. Or blame. My life would be different if that person would just get their act together. That's blame. Or it's just too late. That's regret. In the realm of the divine, in the realm of spirit, there is no shame because everything is created in the presence and the power of love. There is no blame because there's only one life. And there is no regret because there's only this time now. But I think fantasy is the thing that starts with, I wish. I wish I was different. I wish they were different. I wish I had done this and I wish I had done that. Fantasy, what I would offer, is an escape from actually having to activate our imagination. And maybe, instead of saying, I wish, we start by saying, what if? What if? Now, spoiler alert on what if, again, be careful about what you're doing, because not like, if the sign says wet paint, what if I stick my hand in there? That's called discernment, that's another lesson. But what if? What if things could change? What if I can change? What if I reached out to that person? What if I decided to do this? The thing about what ifs is they are what, like David Foster Wallace says, they develop this thing called simple awareness. What if allows us to ask ourselves if things might be as they seem or might be different? What if invites us to consider the question, the ways through which things do not have to be the way they are. That different views are nothing more than an invitation for us to expand our own views. And the beauty of what if is it makes surprises possible. Ignatius Loyola, who was the founder of the Jesuits, and by the way, the first real Jedi, basically says, oh, he was, because you know what he taught. If you've ever met the Jesuits, they're an amazing group of people, but the Jesuits work in something called imaginative prayer. Imaginative prayer. I love that. But the basic principle, the spiritual path, comes down to this: to see the divine in all things. To cultivate a response to all things with reverence. And if the prophets say, the earth is the lines and all therein, and I am filled with amazement and awe and reverence, from that place, that new imagination, then I offer myself to be of service. So the wisdom of the wild is this: it creates the space for disruption to happen. Disruption breaking the patterns that have made us comfortable, insulated, small, to what is possible. And I'll leave you with a quote that's probably the mantra of my life. And it comes from that great spiritual sage, Ted Lasso, who borrowed it from Walt Whitman. Be curious, not judgmental. Be curious, not judgmental. Because when we are judgmental, we are small, constricted, grasping. When we are curious, we are open, expansive, inviting. So the way we go into the wild and access the wisdom therein is to be curious, not judgmental. Thank you.